He looked me dead in the eyes and handed me the summons, right there, in our living room. Our granddaughter still clutching her balloon, pink, wobbling under the ceiling fan. The lemon chiffon cake I'd baked, his favorite, sat half-eaten. One candle, broken clean in half. Effective immediately, he said, not to his wife of 32 years, to a defendant. The seal read, Superior Court of Fulton County, charges, financial coercion, asset mismanagement. The same man who needed me to co-sign his first car loan now claimed I was bleeding him dry. I didn't cry, didn't scream. I walked past our wedding photo, past the dent in the wall where he threw his phone last month. Just work stress, honey. Then I opened the bottom drawer, past expired coupons, orphaned screwdrivers. The folder was still there, labeled Contingency, because after 3 decades, I knew his signature better than my own, and that wasn't his handwriting. I was born in Macon, but I've lived just outside Atlanta for the past 41 years. Same street, same red brick house with the squeaky gate and the hydrangeas that bloom like clockwork every May. I met Paul in the fall of '87. He wore too much cologne and drove a rust-colored pickup, but he always held the door. For strangers, for me, for the version of us we hadn't built yet. We didn't have wealth. We had routines. 2 paychecks, 1 bank account, and a shoebox full of receipts we never quite filed. He worked construction. I taught 5th grade. Every big decision was signed in ballpoint ink at our kitchen table. There were hard seasons. He got laid off during the housing crash. I took on tutoring, skipped lunches, stretched every penny. That's what I thought marriage meant. You brace when the other one wobbles. But after his 60th birthday, things tilted. Late-night calls on the porch, a lipstick-stained email with no sender name, just a vague line about doing what's fair, transfers from our joint account into something with only his name on it. When I asked, he called me paranoid. Paranoid? I was the one who kept the calendar straight, med refills, dentist appointments, HOA fees. I was the one who booked the same lake cabin every July because he always forgot the name of the street. And yet, on our granddaughter's birthday, he handed me a legal summons accusing me of coercion and financial abuse. For a moment, I told myself, this has to be a mistake. Maybe someone talked him into it. Maybe he's confused. Then the clerk from Fulton County called to confirm the court date. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't confusion. This was a strategy. And Paul, he wasn't coming back from this. Because now, he wasn't just my husband. He was the man sitting on the other side of the courtroom. The papers weren't just symbolic. They were specific. Line after line, typed in cold legalese. Intentional misappropriation of marital assets. Financial coercion exerted over dependent spouse. Request to freeze all shared accounts until trial resolution. He hadn't just turned on me. He'd weaponized the law. Filed through a firm downtown I'd never heard of. One of those marble lobby, $500 an hour places that don't take calls from anyone without a retainer. A week later, the bank called. My name was flagged. Our joint account frozen. My card declined at the grocery store while buying milk for our granddaughter. I stood there with $11 in my wallet and a line of strangers behind me, pretending not to stare. When I called Paul, he didn't pick up, but 2 hours later, I got a voicemail from his attorney. Going forward, all communication must be directed through counsel. Any further contact may be considered harassment. Harassment? I raised his children. I paid his insurance when he forgot his premiums. I drove him to physical therapy when his back gave out in '03. And now I was dangerous? It didn't stop there. 2 days later, I got a notice from the county clerk. Paul had filed a request to revoke my inheritance rights and remove me as a co-signer from our estate trust. He wasn't just trying to cut me out. He was trying to erase me. That night, I sat in the dark with a yellow legal pad, not crying, calculating. What did I still have access to? What could I prove? Then I remembered something. Paul wasn't the only one who saved paperwork. I had emails, text chains, screenshots, bank logs he forwarded to me by accident last year, and something else, buried deep in my cloud drive. A backup recording from a speakerphone call I'd once made to him and his accountant on a day I didn't trust what he was saying. I hit play, and just like that, the story shifted, because what they didn't know was I'd been keeping receipts long before they gave me one with a court seal. I didn't hire a PI, didn't kick in doors or call the kids crying. I did what women like me do. I cleaned, started with the file drawer, 20 years of taxes, refinance documents, bank statements, filed under old school folders, green, tabbed, handwritten labels. Each one told a story. Each one held a breadcrumb. And somewhere in between the 2006 utility bills and the lease agreement from when our son flunked out of college and moved back home, I found an email chain Paul had printed. Subject line, asset restructuring, CC'd to someone named J. Hadley, not our CPA. I Googled him. Turns out he wasn't a CPA. He was a private estate consultant, specialized in shielding marital assets before divorce proceedings. Cute. I highlighted his name, scanned the page, saved it to a USB. Then I kept digging. In the back of my closet was a shoebox, not for shoes, for backups. Old hard drive, one dusty BlackBerry, a Post-it note with 4 passcodes I nearly threw away in 2018. That night I charged the BlackBerry. It buzzed to life like it had something to confess. Inside, dozens of texts from Paul to his consultant. One stood out. She's still in the dark, but we need to move before she realizes the house is 100% under her name. Pause. I stared at that line. Under my name? I pulled the deed. 30 years ago, when we bought this house, Paul insisted we list it under me for tax reasons. We never changed it, which meant he was suing me over property I legally owned. Interesting. Next, I opened my cloud drive. That speakerphone call I'd remembered, still there. Clear audio of Paul and his accountant discussing how to make her look volatile in court. And just like that, the narrative flipped. I wasn't the unstable spouse. I was the mark. But they'd underestimated one thing. Boomer women remember everything, especially the things men hope they'll forget. I labeled the folder, proof for counsel. Then I made a second copy, and a third, hidden in a place he'd never look. Inside the slow hum of my computer fan, I heard it. Not revenge, not victory, readiness. Because now I wasn't preparing for court. I was preparing for war. But instead of going to the courthouse first, I called a family meeting. I didn't go to the courthouse first. I called a family meeting, Sunday afternoon, same dining table where we used to do homework and carve Thanksgiving turkeys. The leaf was still in from last Christmas. I didn't tell them why at first, just said, it's important. Our daughter Claire brought lemon bars. Our son Jason came late, still wearing his gym clothes, still smelling like cologne and ego. Paul walked in last, didn't look at me, didn't greet anyone, just sat, arms crossed, like he was bracing for a performance he thought he'd already won. I didn't give a speech, didn't cry. I placed a small Bluetooth speaker in the center of the table, pressed play. His voice filled the room from a recording 2 months earlier. We need to tighten things. She's too emotional to handle financial matters. Let's push for incompetence and get control of the accounts before she catches on. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting, no gasps, just silence. A silence so deep you could hear Claire's spoon hit her coffee saucer. Then came the twist in his voice. Laughter. She still thinks I'm protecting her. Jason looked at me. For the first time in years, really looked. Claire asked one question. Mom, when did you record this? I told her the truth. And then I told them about the emails, the fake consultant, the missing money, the house deed, the volatility narrative they were building. Paul stood, fast, too fast. He called it a misunderstanding, said I was overreacting, said I was making him look bad in front of the kids. And that was the moment I realized he wasn't ashamed. He was just embarrassed to get caught. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Claire stood up. So did Jason. Not for me. Against him. Paul walked out. Didn't take a plate. Didn't say goodbye. And when the door shut, that old wood creaked the same way it did when we used to tuck the kids in at night. But this time, it sounded like an ending. The next day, I walked into my lawyer's office with a folder and a name, J. Hadley. The next morning, I walked into my lawyer's office with two things, a manila folder and a name. J. Hadley, I said. My lawyer, Nina, mid-40s, sharp as a scalpel, just raised one brow and opened her laptop. 10 minutes later, she looked up. He's not licensed in the state of Georgia. He's not even a financial advisor. He's a shell. I slid the folder across the table. Inside were printed emails, text transcripts, audio recordings, the full map of the setup Paul had been building for months. But Nina stopped flipping when she reached the bank logs. "What's this?" she asked. I explained. Paul had opened a new account weeks before filing. He'd siphoned money from our shared retirement account just under the reporting threshold, then rerouted it through a dummy LLC linked to Hadley. Timing? The exact week he served me the lawsuit. Nina leaned back. "Well, Shen," she said, "we're not defending anymore. We're countering. We filed the suit that same afternoon. False accusation, financial fraud, emotional distress. And this time, I wasn't the one answering subpoenas." At the preliminary hearing, Paul showed up with a different attorney, younger, nervous. He avoided eye contact the whole time, didn't even look up when the judge asked his counsel why his client had transferred over $68,000 to an unverified business entity 2 days after filing the petition. Nina stood. No dramatics, no moral grandstanding, just a single line. "We believe the plaintiff used the legal system as a weapon of manipulation, and we have proof he manufactured claims to gain financial control." Then she handed over a USB. The judge didn't say much. He just nodded and ordered both parties to submit full disclosures, including marital asset history, within 7 days. But the real hit came after the hearing. As we stepped into the hallway, Nina turned to me. "We're not just playing defense anymore. If he keeps pushing, we'll file for punitive damages and request a forensic audit." A forensic audit. 3 words that made Paul flinch, just slightly, before he walked past me like I was invisible. I didn't speak, didn't smile, but for the first time since the day he handed me those papers in our living room, he looked unsure. He tried to hide assets, but forgot the one thing he couldn't fake, my name on the deed. Paul always thought he was the smart one. He'd tell people he handled the big stuff. I handled birthdays, groceries, the color of the curtains. But there's something about being underestimated for 3 decades. You start taking mental notes, like how, when we bought the house, he insisted it go under my name. "For tax reasons," he said. "Safer that way." I was 7 months pregnant, too tired to argue, too trusting to question. He never thought I'd remember. But during discovery, when both sides had to submit full asset histories, his lawyer tried to list the house as joint property. Nina raised one eyebrow, reached into her briefcase, and handed the judge a certified copy of the deed. My name, sole ownership, since 1993. There it was, in black and white. The courtroom went still. Paul didn't look shocked. He looked blank. Because in all his calculations, all the account shifting, fake consultants, courtroom performance, he forgot the one thing he couldn't forge, a title with my signature on it. The judge didn't rule that day. It wasn't a final hearing. But when court adjourned, Paul didn't follow his attorney out. He just sat there, staring at the bench like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. And for the first time since all this started, I didn't feel like the defendant. I felt like the ledger had finally balanced. Not because I humiliated him, not because I won, but because he finally saw what he'd tried so hard to ignore, that I wasn't just part of the house. I owned it. And then, a week later, my face showed up on the local news. A week later, my face showed up on the local news, not for winning anything, not for filing lawsuits, but because one of the courthouse reporters overheard the phrase "fake consultant" in the hallway and followed up. They didn't use my name, just elderly woman files counterclaim against husband for financial deception. But it spread fast. A friend from church called, then my old principal, then someone I hadn't spoken to since PTA meetings in 1999. And the weirdest part, they weren't calling to gossip, they were calling to say thank you. Turns out I wasn't the only one, not the only woman who'd been erased from her own finances, not the only wife who'd been handed legal papers like an eviction notice from her own life. Boomer Facebook lit up. Groups with names like Second Act Sisters and Women Who Remember Everything started reposting the headline. People were tagging their aunts, their moms, even themselves, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not power, not pride, relief, because for the first time, I wasn't carrying this weight alone. Claire forwarded me a post from one of those groups. It had my story, written in someone else's words, and a comment underneath that simply read, "She didn't fight to win. She fought because she was tired of being erased." And they were right. This wasn't about revenge. It was about something quieter, something heavier, like the feeling of finally being seen in a room you've been standing in your whole life. So when the judge asked if I had anything to say before the final ruling, I stood. So when the judge asked if I had anything to say before the final ruling, I stood. I didn't prepare a statement, didn't bring notes, just the truth, the way it had always lived inside me, quiet and uninvited. "I wasn't always this brave, Shem," I said. "My name was never on the door, but it was on the deed, and maybe that's the story here." The courtroom didn't move, Paul didn't blink, and I didn't look at him when I said it. I spent years making sure this family had clean socks and insurance and birthday cakes and working internet. He handled the big stuff, that's what they said. But all the little things, turns out they mattered too. They were the foundation. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry, just tired. Not the kind of tired a nap fixes, the kind you feel when you've spent years being edited out of your own life, and you finally grab the pen back. The judge thanked me, said they'd review all submissions and reconvene in 2 weeks. That's how it ends, at least legally, for now. No gavel slam, no dramatic verdict, just a quiet pause between the question and the answer. But that's okay, because I don't need closure. I needed clarity, and I got it. That folder I used to hide in the bottom drawer, it's still there, labeled Contingency. But now there's a new one beside it, labeled Legacy, because someday my granddaughter might walk into a room and be underestimated. She might stand behind someone who calls her dramatic or emotional or just the help. And when that day comes, I want her to remember her grandmother stood, not to scream, not to win, but to be counted. And sometimes that's enough. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever had to prove that your silence wasn't weakness, that your kindness wasn't absence, that your love wasn't small, then I'd love to hear your story. Drop it in the comments or send it to someone who's still carrying what they shouldn't have to carry alone. Because one woman standing quietly in court, that's a moment. But hundreds of us finally being heard, that's a reckoning, and it's long overdue. What would you put in your legacy folder? Like, share, subscribe. Your story matters.